My family skipped my wedding because I married a waiter, so I revealed my husband's true identity, and they faced a revenge they couldn't resist. My name is Sophia, and I'm 28 years old. I walked down that church aisle completely alone. Not a single member of my family in sight. The beautiful bouquet in my hand shook slightly as I realized the man I'd begged to walk me down the aisle had decided I wasn't worth the 3-hour drive. My sisters had texted that morning saying my wedding to a waiter was embarrassing to our family name. I stopped halfway down the aisle, looked at my groom, Daniel, waiting at the altar with tears in his eyes, and made the conscious decision to smile. If my family thought I wasn't worth their time, I'd prove I didn't need their approval. The pastor asked, "Who gives this woman?" and Daniel stepped forward. "She gives herself," he said firmly. "And I'm honored to receive her." That moment changed everything about how I saw myself and my worth. I grew up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, in a big white columned colonial house that looked like it had been ripped straight from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. The lawn was manicured to the millimeter, the driveway always held 2 gleaming European sedans, and the mailbox proudly displayed the name Parker in elegant gold lettering. In our little corner of the Midwest, that name carried weight. My father, Richard Parker, owned the largest insurance agency north of Des Moines, the kind of business where local bankers greeted him by first name and offered him the best tea times without being asked. My mother, Margaret, didn't have a traditional job, but she was busier than most CEOs, chairing charity galas, running the women's club, and, above all, orchestrating the marital futures of her 3 daughters like a general moving troops across a battlefield. My older sisters, Ashley and Brittany, executed the family plan flawlessly. Ashley married at 23 to a widowed private banker 15 years her senior whose family practically owned half the hospitals in the state. Brittany held out until 25 before sealing the deal with a real estate tycoon who thought nothing of flying to his own golf course for a quick 9 holes before lunch. My parents referred to both unions as strategic alliances. My sisters seemed perfectly content floating through life on yachts and in charity ball gowns. They never questioned the blueprint. And then there was me, Sophia Elizabeth Parker, the glitch in the otherwise perfect Parker matrix. At 26 I was still single, still stubbornly employed as a marketing coordinator for a tiny Chicago nonprofit that helped homeless veterans, and still the source of whispered concern at every country club luncheon my mother attended. My salary barely covered rent on a 4th-floor walk-up studio in Lincoln Park, but the freedom it bought me was priceless. Every holiday visit home came with the same ritual, relatives leaning in with syrupy smiles asking when I was going to settle down with someone suitable, while my mother waved away my job with a little laugh. "Oh, that's just Sophia's career phase. She'll come to her senses soon enough." I didn't. By 27 the campaign intensified. Family dinners turned into ambush interviews. My father would set down his scotch, fix me with the same look he used on underperforming brokers, and casually mention the very promising son of a judge he'd played golf with. My mother preferred the velvet glove approach. "Darling, I ran into Charlotte Caldwell at the club yesterday. Her son is a tax attorney, never married, such a nice boy. I took the liberty of giving her your number." I politely declined every setup. The men they paraded in front of me were all cut from the same expensive cloth, tall, predictably handsome in that clean-cut Midwestern way, Ivy League or at least Big Ten educated, 3rd or 4th generation professionals who golfed on weekends and collected wine they didn't actually enjoy drinking. They looked at me like I was a balance sheet, good pedigree, acceptable looks, fertile, well-mannered, and calculated what I would add to their portfolio. Conversation rarely ventured beyond the safest topics, the market, vacation homes, which private schools were best these days. After the 3rd or 4th excruciating coffee date, I simply stopped coming home as often. Chicago became my fortress. My cramped apartment, with its creaky floors and radiator that clanked like a drunk tambourine player, felt more like home than the manicured mansion ever had. I thought I had successfully escaped the marriage plot, at least for a little while longer. Then I met Daniel. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening in late September. I was having dinner with my college roommate Lisa at Romano's, a cozy but upscale Italian place in River North where the lighting is low, the wine list is long, and the tiramisu is legitimately life-changing. We were halfway through a bottle of Barolo when Lisa leaned across the table and whispered, your waiter is absurdly cute. I glanced up from my menu and felt my breath catch. Warm brown eyes, dark hair that curled just slightly at the ends, and a smile that looked like it had been designed specifically to ruin people's composure. He moved through the dining room with an easy confidence that made the black waistcoat and crisp white shirt look like they'd been invented for him alone. When he introduced himself, "Hi, I'm Daniel, I'll be taking care of you tonight," his voice had a low, gentle rasp that somehow made the standard server greeting sound like an invitation. He recommended the cioppino with such genuine enthusiasm that I ordered it even though I'd been planning on pasta. "Trust me," he said, flashing that smile again, "Chef Michael has been in a mood, in the best way, tonight. You won't regret it." He was right. The stew was a revelation, mussels and clams and shrimp swimming in a tomato broth so rich I almost cried. Throughout the meal he anticipated every need, refilling water glasses before they were empty, timing the delivery of courses perfectly, even swooping in to rescue Lisa's dropped napkin with a playful "I got you" that made us both laugh. At one point a man at the next table, some finance bro in a too shiny suit, snapped his fingers and demanded a different bottle of wine because the first one wasn't cold enough. I braced for awkwardness, but Daniel handled it with a calm that bordered on artistry. "Of course, sir, let me take care of that for you right away," he said, zero sarcasm, zero eye roll, just pure professionalism wrapped in warmth. When he returned with the new bottle, he even managed to make the guy feel like he'd done him a favor. I was impressed. More than impressed. I was charmed in a way I hadn't been in years. As Lisa and I gathered our coats to leave, I did something utterly unlike me. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear the soft jazz playing overhead. I slipped my business card into the leather folder with the check and, on the back, scribbled in my neatest handwriting, "Thank you for making tonight one of the best dinners I've had in forever. Coffee when you're not saving the world one perfect cioppino at a time, Sophia." I spent the entire next day convinced I'd made a fool of myself. Sophisticated women from Cedar Falls did not ask out their waiters. Parker women definitely did not ask out their waiters. But then my phone buzzed at 2:17 p.m. with a number I didn't recognize. "This is probably incredibly presumptuous," the voice on the other end said, and I knew instantly who it was. But beautiful women who tip well and leave their numbers don't walk into my section every day. "Daniel from Romano's, by the way, just in case you left your card for a different server last night." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. "I don't make a habit of asking out waitstaff," I managed. "So consider us even on the presumptuous front." We talked for 43 minutes, about Chicago, about favorite hidden bars, about how he'd moved here from Portland 2 years ago chasing a dream that hadn't quite panned out yet but that he still believed in. His voice was even better without the clatter of silverware in the background, warm and a little husky, like he was smiling the entire time he spoke. I hung up the phone with butterflies doing aerial stunts in my stomach and the terrifying, exhilarating realization that I had just taken the first truly unscripted step of my adult life. If only I'd known how spectacularly my family was about to lose their collective minds. Our first date was at a small coffee shop in Wicker Park. I expected awkward small talk and realized within 10 minutes that I'd never connected with someone so effortlessly. Daniel was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly well-read. He spoke passionately about literature, travel, and his dreams of someday opening his own restaurant. "I know it sounds crazy," he said, stirring his cappuccino, "but I want to create spaces where people feel genuinely welcome. Not just fed, but cared for." That vision, combined with his genuine warmth, made me forget all about my family's expectations of appropriate suitors. Daniel made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. He listened when I talked about my work with veterans, asking thoughtful questions instead of politely waiting for his turn to speak. By our third date, I was completely smitten. By our sixth, I knew I was falling in love with someone who saw me exactly as I was and loved what he found. 3 months into dating Daniel, I made the mistake of mentioning him during a family phone call. My mother's immediate question wasn't about his character or how he treated me, but about his profession. "A waiter, Sophia, really?" The disappointment in her voice was palpable. "What does he plan to do with his life?" "He's saving money to open his own restaurant, Mom. He's incredibly hardworking and ambitious." Ambitious waiters are still waiters, dear. What about that nice Henderson boy I mentioned? He just made partner at his father's law firm. I'd never even met the Henderson boy, but in my mother's mind, his professional success automatically made him a better match than the man who made me genuinely happy. The conversation ended with her promising to think about it when I asked if I could bring Daniel to Ashley's upcoming birthday party. She called back 2 days later. Your father and I discussed it. We think it's best if you come alone to Ashley's party. We don't want to confuse people about your relationship status. Translation: they were embarrassed by my choice and didn't want their social circle meeting someone they considered beneath our family's standards. I went to the party alone, enduring sympathetic looks from relatives who assumed I was still single and couldn't manage to find an appropriate husband. Ashley pulled me aside during dessert. Mom told me about your waiter boyfriend. Sophia, you can't be serious about this. His name is Daniel. And yes, I'm serious about him. But what's his family like? What's his background? You can't just throw away everything Dad built for us. Everything Dad built for us, as if our family's financial success somehow obligated me to marry within a certain tax bracket. I left the party early, frustrated and hurt by their inability to see past Daniel's job title. Daniel noticed my mood when I got home. Instead of pressing for details, he made us hot chocolate and put on our favorite movie. It wasn't until I was curled up against his chest that I realized something profound. This was what love actually felt like. Not the strategic partnerships my sisters had, but genuine care and comfort. My family doesn't think you're good enough for me, I said quietly. He was silent for a moment, then kissed the top of my head. Maybe I'm not, but I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of you. That response made me love him even more, though I didn't tell him that yet. Have you ever felt caught between your family's expectations and your own happiness? 8 months later, Daniel proposed during a weekend trip to Wisconsin. We were hiking through Devil's Lake State Park when he stopped at a scenic overlook, dropped to one knee, and pulled out a simple but beautiful solitaire ring. Sophia Parker, you've changed everything about how I see my future. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me? Through tears of joy, I said yes. The ring was perfect, elegant without being ostentatious, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. As he slipped it onto my finger, I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced. The drive back to Chicago was filled with excited planning. We decided on a small ceremony in 6 months, just family and close friends. Daniel suggested Romano's for the reception, where we'd first met, which seemed wonderfully romantic. My mother's response was immediately deflating. Engaged? Sophia, are you sure you've thought this through? You barely know this young man. I've been dating him for 8 months, Mom. I know him better than Ashley knew Brad when they got engaged after 4 months. That was different. Brad's family has been in our social circle for years. We knew exactly what Ashley was getting into. My father took the phone. Sweetheart, we just want you to be practical. Have you discussed finances, career plans? What if this restaurant dream doesn't work out? Their concerns weren't about my happiness or compatibility with Daniel, but about his earning potential and social status. I ended the call promising to bring Daniel home soon so they could get to know him properly. That visit was a disaster. Daniel drove up to Cedar Falls on a Saturday morning, nervous but determined to make a good impression. He'd bought flowers for my mother and researched my father's insurance business to find common ground for conversation. My parents were polite but cold. Every question felt like an interrogation designed to highlight Daniel's humble background. When he mentioned growing up in a single-parent household, my mother's expression showed thinly veiled disapproval. "And your mother's profession?" she asked. "She's a nurse at Methodist Hospital. She worked double shifts to put me through college." The admiration in Daniel's voice when he spoke about his mother's sacrifices was beautiful to me, but I could see my parents cataloging this information as another mark against him. Dinner was even worse. My sisters and their husbands joined us, turning the meal into a passive-aggressive showcase of appropriate relationships. Brad discussed his latest investment opportunities while Ashley nodded adoringly. Mark detailed his real estate developments while Brittany played the perfect supportive wife. Meanwhile, Daniel answered increasingly pointed questions about his long-term career aspirations and financial planning strategies with grace and honesty that made me proud and furious simultaneously. The final blow came during wedding planning. I'd naively hoped that once my family saw how serious Daniel and I were, they'd warm up to him. Instead, their resistance intensified. "We need to discuss the guest list," my mother said during a lunch meeting I'd requested to plan details. "Your father's concerned about mixing social circles." "What does that mean exactly?" "Well, Daniel's family and friends might not be comfortable with some of our guests. We don't want anyone to feel out of place." The suggestion was clear: Daniel's people weren't sophisticated enough to mingle with the Parker family social circle. When I pushed back, my mother sighed dramatically. "Sophia, we're trying to help you avoid embarrassment. A successful wedding requires careful planning, not just good intentions." "Successful wedding? Mom, it's about Daniel and me promising to love each other forever. The rest is just party planning." That's exactly the kind of naive thinking that concerns us. 2 weeks before the wedding, the situation reached a breaking point. I called to confirm transportation arrangements for my family, only to learn that none of them had actually planned to attend. "I thought we discussed this," my mother said when I called in a panic. "Your father can't take time away from the business right now. And the girls have prior commitments." "Prior commitments? It's my wedding. Sophia, we've made our feelings clear about this marriage. We can't in good conscience celebrate a decision we believe you'll regret." I was speechless. My own family was boycotting my wedding because they disapproved of my choice in husband. The cruelty was breathtaking. But what hurt most was their certainty that they knew better than I did about my own happiness. "What about walking me down the aisle?" I asked my father directly when he took the phone. "Honey, if no one else is going, it doesn't make sense for me to drive all that way alone. You understand?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped with math homework could find my wedding day not worth a 3-hour drive. I didn't understand how the women who'd spent years planning their own elaborate weddings could skip mine entirely. That night, I cried in Daniel's arms until I had no tears left. He held me silently, letting me grieve the family support I desperately wanted but would never receive. "We could postpone," he offered quietly. "Give them more time to come around." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not putting my life on hold, waiting for them to approve of my choices. We're getting married as planned, with or without them." And that's how I ended up walking down that aisle alone, my wedding dress trailing behind me as every step carried me away from my family's expectations and toward my new life. The small church was filled with Daniel's family and our friends, people who genuinely wanted to celebrate our love. Daniel's mother, Maria, had tears streaming down her face as she watched me approach. His sister, Rosa, gave me an encouraging nod. Our friends from Chicago cheered softly when Daniel stepped forward to meet me halfway down the aisle. The ceremony was beautiful and intimate. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to our union, the silence was peaceful rather than tense. No one there had any doubts about our love or commitment. During our vows, Daniel promised to be the family I deserved, and I promised to build a life with him based on mutual respect rather than social expectations. When we kissed as husband and wife, the small congregation erupted in genuine joy. The reception at Romano's was perfect. Daniel's chef friend had created an incredible meal, and our friends filled the private dining room with laughter and celebration. For the first time in months, I felt completely happy and at peace with my decision. We honeymooned in Tuscany for 2 weeks, staying in small family-run hotels and eating at local restaurants where Daniel charmed the owners with his enthusiasm for their craft. He was in his element, and watching him discover new flavors and techniques filled me with excitement for our future together. It wasn't until we returned to Chicago that I learned my family had seen our wedding photos on social media. The pictures Daniel's sister had posted showed our beautiful ceremony, our glowing happiness, and most importantly, the intimate setting of Romano's. What my family didn't know was that Romano's wasn't just where we'd met and fallen in love. It was also the flagship restaurant of Castellano Restaurant Group, a company that owned over 40 establishments across the Midwest. And Daniel wasn't just a waiter who dreamed of opening his own restaurant someday. He was Daniel Castellano, heir to the family empire, who'd insisted on starting at the bottom to truly understand every aspect of the business. My phone started ringing the morning after we returned from Italy. It was my mother. And for the first time in months, her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, panic mixed with newfound respect. "Sophia, darling, we need to talk." The woman who'd found my husband not worth attending our wedding suddenly wanted a conversation. I couldn't help but smile as I considered whether she was worth my time. The tables had turned in the most satisfying way possible, and my family was about to learn exactly what they'd missed by judging someone based on appearances rather than character. I let the first call from my mother slide straight to voicemail. Then the second. Then the third. Daniel was sprawled across the hotel bed in our Amalfi suite, sleeves rolled up, hair still damp from the shower, watching me silence the phone with the kind of slow, delighted grin that told me he already knew exactly what was coming. "You're really going to make her suffer, aren't you?" he asked, voice low and amused as he folded the linen shirt he'd worn to dinner the night before. "I'm not making anyone suffer," I said, flopping down beside him and waving my phone like evidence. "I'm simply allowing natural consequences to unfold." The screen lit up again almost on cue. A text from Ashley, my older sister, perpetually the family's self-appointed crisis manager. "Call MOM right now. Family emergency." Daniel read it over my shoulder and let out a soft snort. "Define emergency." "Oh, you know," I said, scrolling to the voicemail icon. "The life-threatening kind that only strikes after someone runs a suspiciously thorough Google search on their new son-in-law." He laughed, that deep, unhurried laugh I'd first fallen for at Romano's Chicago when he was still pretending to be just a waiter. "Should I be flattered or insulted that marrying me qualifies as a 5-alarm fire?" "Be flattered," I told him, hitting play on the first voicemail. "Insult is reserved for people who measure a man's worth by the cost of his watch." My mother's voice filled the room, polished and urgent. "Message 1, sweet as saccharin, Sophia, darling, it's Mom. Call me back when you have a moment. We need to talk about a few family matters." Message 2, 37 minutes later, slightly sharper. "Sophia, your father and I really must speak with you about Daniel's situation." Message 3, full panic mode, volume climbing with every word. "Sophia Marie Parker Castellano, you pick up this phone right now. We had no idea who Daniel actually was, and we need to make this right immediately." I paused the playback and looked at Daniel. "She used my married name," I said, half laughing despite myself. "That's a first. Also, make this right? As if you're a corporate merger they accidentally voted against." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Do I get a say in whether I want to be made right with people who couldn't be bothered to show up to our wedding?" "Absolutely not," I said, kissing the corner of his mouth. "You're mine now." They lost voting privileges the day they decided a waiter wasn't good enough for their daughter. He hummed, pleased, and went back to unpacking. I watched him lay out the ridiculous number of linen shirts he'd bought on the trip, each one somehow more perfect than the last, and felt that familiar swell of gratitude. This man had spent years working every single job in his family's restaurants: dishwasher, line cook, host, server, bartender, manager. He could have sat in the corporate office from day one, but he wanted to earn it. He wanted to understand the soul of the business his grandfather had built with calloused hands and a single tiny trattoria in Little Italy. My family had seen the apron and the polite smile and decided that was the whole story. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my father, rare enough that my stomach actually dipped. I sighed and answered. "Hi, Dad. Sophia." His voice was tight, the way it got when the market dipped or the country club raised dues. "Thank God. We need to talk." "Now. About?" "About the fact that your husband owns Romano's. 43 locations. Over 200 million in revenue last year. Sophia, do you have any idea what you've married into?" I closed my eyes. There it was. Stumbled into. As if I'd tripped over a billionaire in the dark. "I married Daniel," I said slowly. I knew exactly who he was when I said I do. The question is, why are you only interested now? Silence on the line, thick, embarrassed silence. Then, we made a mistake, he said at last. We should have been more welcoming. Your mother is beside herself. Funny, I said. She didn't sound beside herself when she told me a waiter would drag the family down. She sounded pretty composed then. Sophia, where was this energy when I walked down the aisle alone, Dad? When the pews on my side were half empty because everyone decided a courthouse wedding wasn't worth rearranging tea times for? Another silence. Longer this time. We didn't understand, he said finally, voice small. If we'd known, that's the part that matters, isn't it? I cut in. If you'd known he was rich, you would have shown up. You would have smiled for photos. You would have toasted the happy couple. But because you thought he was beneath us, you couldn't be bothered. That's what I'm supposed to forgive? I hung up before he could answer. Daniel was watching me, arms crossed, expression unreadable. You okay? He asked quietly. I'm perfect, I said, and meant it. They don't get to rewrite history just because the plot twist benefits them now. He smiled, small, proud, a little bit wicked, and pulled me down onto the bed with him. Let them stew, he murmured against my temple. We've got better things to do. And for the next few days, we did exactly that. We ignored the escalating parade of emergencies. Brittany, my cousin who once told me Daniel would never fit in at the club, suddenly had a work crisis that only my connections could solve. Ashley sent a breezy text asking for just a few restaurant recommendations for an important client dinner, as if she hadn't spent my rehearsal dinner whispering that I was throwing my life away. My mother left voicemails that grew more elaborate by the hour, sudden family reunions that simply wouldn't be the same without us, a charity gala where Daniel's presence would be such an asset, a Sunday dinner that had apparently been sacred tradition for 30 years even though I couldn't remember the last time we'd all eaten together. I let every single one go unanswered. Instead, I watched Daniel slide back into his real life with the ease of someone slipping into a favorite coat. Mornings at the corporate office in River North, afternoons walking the floor of whichever restaurant was testing a new menu, evenings on the phone with chefs in Nashville or Denver or Miami, tasting notes scrawled on napkins, eyes bright with ideas. He never gloated. Never once said I told you so about my family. He just lived the truth he'd always known, worth isn't something you inherit or marry into. It's something you build, plate by plate, shift by shift, choice by choice. One night, about a week after we got back to Chicago, we were eating cacio e pepe on the couch in sweatpants, takeout from the original Romano's location, because even the owner prefers Nana's recipe to anything fancy, when my phone lit up again. Mom. Again. Daniel glanced at it, then at me. Your call, Soph. I picked it up, put it on speaker, and set it on the coffee table like we were about to negotiate peace terms. Sophia, my mother started without greeting, voice trembling with rehearsed warmth, we're having a family dinner next Sunday. Your father and I would love it if you and Daniel could come. We'd booked the private room at the Capitol Grill. Just us, Ashley and Mark, Brittany, Uncle Richard. A proper celebration. We want to welcome Daniel officially. I looked at Daniel. He raised an eyebrow, took a slow sip of wine, and said nothing. I leaned toward the phone. Mom, do you remember what you said when I told you we were getting married at the courthouse? A pause. I was upset, sweetheart. I wanted the big wedding you deserved. You said, and I quote, if he can't even give you a proper wedding, what kind of life is he planning to give you? Another pause, longer this time. I was wrong, she said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You were. Daniel reached over and laced his fingers through mine. We'll think about it, I said. Have a good night, Mom. I ended the call. For a moment we just sat there, the city lights flickering through the windows, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of Daniel setting his wine glass down. They'll keep trying, he said eventually. I know. You sure you're okay letting them dangle? I turned to face him fully. I'm not punishing them, Daniel. I'm protecting us. When they're ready to love you for who you are, not what you own, the door will still be there. Until then, we have pasta, and this couch, and about 43 restaurants where nobody pretends to be someone they're not. I'm good. He smiled, slow, real, devastating, and pulled me into his lap. "Mrs. Castellano," he said, brushing his lips against my temple, "you are my favorite plot twist." And somewhere across town, my mother was probably drafting another voicemail. But here, in our little universe of takeout containers and barefoot evenings, the only emergency was deciding whether we wanted tiramisu or gelato for dessert. We went with both. A week after our return, I finally agreed to have lunch with Ashley. She suggested meeting at Marcel's, an upscale French restaurant that happened to be owned by Castellano Restaurant Group. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ashley arrived 15 minutes late, her usual power move, but stopped short when she saw me already seated at the best table in the house with the general manager personally ensuring my water glass stayed full. "Sophia," she said carefully, sliding into her seat, "you look wonderful. Marriage suits you." "Thank you," I replied, noting how her eyes kept darting around the elegant dining room that my husband's family had created. "I wanted to apologize," she continued, "for missing your wedding. The timing was just impossible with Brad's work schedule." "Brad's work schedule," I repeated flatly. "At First National Bank?" "Yes, you know how demanding his position is." What Ashley didn't know was that First National Bank was one of Castellano Restaurant Group's primary lenders. Daniel had mentioned Brad Parker's name during a recent conversation about expanding into Iowa markets. "Ashley," I said gently, "you do realize that your husband works very closely with my husband's company, right?" Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" "First National handles most of our restaurant financing. Brad's been trying to schedule a meeting with Daniel for months to discuss increasing our credit line." The color drained completely from Ashley's face as the implications sank in. "Sophia, I had no idea. We really should have been more supportive." "More supportive," I echoed. "Is that what we're calling it now? I know we made mistakes, but we're family." "Family forgives family." That word again, family. They'd made it clear I wasn't worth their time or effort, but now that circumstances had changed, suddenly family bonds mattered. "Ashley, do you remember what you said to me at your birthday party? About not throwing away everything Dad built for us?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I was just concerned about your future. You were concerned about appearances." "There's a difference. Can we start over?" she asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Please." I didn't answer Ashley's question immediately. Instead, I watched her squirm for a moment. This sister who'd always been so confident in her superiority. The woman who'd once lectured me about appropriate marriage prospects was now literally sitting in a restaurant owned by the man she'd dismissed. "Tell me something, Ashley," I said finally. "What exactly do you think starting over looks like? We could be sisters again. Real sisters. You could bring Daniel to family dinners and we could get to know him properly. The man you called an embarrassment to our family name. Sophia, please. We made a mistake. Can't you forgive us?" I leaned back in my chair, considering her question. Forgiveness was one thing, but forgetting was entirely different. My family had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to go home and tell Mom and Dad that Daniel and I will consider attending the next family gathering, but there will be conditions." Ashley's relief was visible. "Of course, whatever you need. First, there will be no mention of our previous disagreements. No awkward apologies or explanations to other family members about why you all missed my wedding. Done. Second, Daniel will be treated with the same respect you show Brad and Mark. No condescending questions about his background or future plans." "Absolutely." Third, I paused for effect. "You're going to tell me exactly how Brad's promotion prospects are tied to his ability to maintain good relationships with his bank's major clients." Ashley's face crumpled. "Sophia, you can't possibly." "I'm not threatening anything," I said smoothly. "I'm simply suggesting that Brad might want to reconsider any past comments about my husband's suitability as a family member." The power shift was complete, and we both knew it. Ashley had spent years looking down on me from her position as the successful sister who'd married well. Now she was realizing that her definition of marrying well had been embarrassingly narrow. "Sophia, I'm truly sorry." "We all are. Sorry that you were wrong about Daniel's financial status, or sorry that you treated me badly?" "Both," she said quietly. I've been thinking about our conversation at my birthday party, and I was horrible to you. You deserved better from all of us. It was the first genuine apology I'd received from any of them, and I felt some of my anger begin to soften. Ashley had always been the most competitive of my sisters, but she'd also been the most honest when cornered. I appreciate that, I said. But Ashley, this isn't just about hurt feelings. You all made a decision about what kind of family you wanted to be. Actions have consequences. What does that mean for us going forward? I signaled for the check, noting with satisfaction that the server immediately comped our entire meal with a deferential nod. Another small reminder of how dramatically things had changed. It means that relationships are earned, not assumed, just like respect. 2 weeks later, my parents invited us to a small family dinner that turned out to include not just my sisters and their husbands, but several family friends who happened to own businesses that could benefit from connections to Castellano Restaurant Group. I should have expected it, really. My parents never did anything without calculating the potential networking opportunities. Daniel and I arrived fashionably on time to find my father holding court in the living room, regaling guests with stories about his successful daughter and her accomplished husband, the same daughter he'd been too busy to walk down the aisle just a month earlier. Sophia, my mother swept toward us with theatrical warmth. And Daniel, we're so delighted you could join us. Daniel, to his credit, accepted her embrace graciously. Thank you for including me, Mrs. Parker. Your home is beautiful. Please call me Margaret. We're family now. Family now. The irony was almost too much to bear. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated performance. My parents had clearly briefed everyone on acceptable conversation topics. No one mentioned the wedding. My father's insurance business conveniently came up several times in relation to restaurant industry needs. And Brad spent most of the evening trying to position himself as Daniel's new best friend. I've been following Castellano's expansion strategy, he said over the main course. The Iowa market seems ripe for development. We're certainly exploring opportunities, Daniel replied diplomatically. Brad has some excellent insights about the Cedar Falls area, my father interjected. He grew up there, knows the market intimately. I watched this pathetic attempt at leveraging family connections for business gain with growing disgust. These were the same people who'd found Daniel unworthy of their time, now trying to profit from association with him. The breaking point came during dessert when my mother suggested that Daniel might want to consider opening a Castellano location in Cedar Falls with Brad as the local banking partner and my father handling the insurance needs. It would be such a wonderful family collaboration, she said sweetly. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd been polite all evening, but I could see his patience wearing thin. These people had hurt his wife and were now trying to exploit their relationship for financial gain. That's an interesting suggestion, he said carefully. Though we typically work with established partners who've proven their commitment to our values. The subtle dig hit its mark. My mother's smile faltered and Brad's face flushed red. But the real bombshell came when Daniel continued, actually, we've been reviewing all our banking relationships recently. The table went dead silent. Brad looked like he was about to be sick. Ashley gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, and my parents exchanged panicked glances. That's when I realized Daniel had been planning this moment all along. He'd been perfectly polite, letting them reveal their true motivations before dropping the hammer. Of course, Daniel added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We always prioritize loyalty and consistency in our business relationships, don't we, darling? I smiled back at my brilliant husband. Absolutely. We believe actions speak louder than words. The ride home was quiet until we'd driven several blocks. Then Daniel and I both burst into laughter at the same time. Did you see Brad's face when you mentioned reviewing banking relationships? I gasped between giggles. I thought your father was going to choke on his tiramisu, Daniel replied, still chuckling. Though I have to admit, I felt a little bad for Ashley. She seemed genuinely remorseful. Ashley's always been the most direct one. If she's apologizing, she probably means it. What about the others? I considered the question as we drove through Chicago's late-night streets. Mom and Dad are panicking because they realized they miscalculated badly. Brittany's probably trying to figure out how to leverage this for her own benefit. And Brad, well, Brad's probably updating his resume. You know, I would never actually interfere with his job because of personal issues, right? I know, I said, squeezing his hand. But they don't know that. And frankly, after the way they treated us, a little uncertainty seems like appropriate payback. So, what's our long-term strategy here? Do we want a relationship with your family or not? It was a fair question and one I'd been wrestling with since Ashley's lunch apology. Part of me wanted to cut them off completely to build a life with Daniel that didn't include people who'd shown their true colors so clearly. But another part of me still remembered the good times, the family traditions that had shaped me, the possibility that people could genuinely change. I think we give them a chance to prove they've learned something, I said finally. But we don't make it easy for them. What does that look like? Boundaries, clear expectations, and consequences when they inevitably test those boundaries. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Your family, your rules. I'll follow your lead. Actually, I said, an idea forming. I think it's time they learned that actions really do have consequences. Remember how you mentioned Castellano was looking for a location for the new farm-to-table concept? The sustainable dining project? Yeah, we're scouting locations in several markets. Well, Cedar Falls has been lobbying for more upscale dining options. The city council's been offering tax incentives for the right kind of development. Daniel caught on immediately. And if we were to open there, we'd need local banking and insurance partners. Exactly. Partners who understand the importance of family loyalty and treating people with respect regardless of their perceived status. You're devious, Daniel said admiringly. I love it. They want to benefit from our success. Fine. But they're going to earn it the hard way by proving they've actually changed their values, not just their opinion of you. And if they can't prove that, then they'll learn that burning bridges has consequences. Sometimes the person you dismiss today becomes the person whose approval you need tomorrow. We pulled into our parking garage, and I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since childhood, I held all the cards in my relationship with my family. They needed something from me, and I was going to make sure they understood exactly what that meant. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Wonderful evening. Let's plan another dinner soon. I showed the message to Daniel, who shook his head in amazement. Ready for round 2? He asked. Bring it on, I replied. They have no idea what they're dealing with now. 6 months later, I stood in the private dining room of Castellano Cedar Falls, watching my family navigate the most uncomfortable dinner of their lives. The restaurant's grand opening had been a massive success, and tonight's family celebration was the culmination of everything that had transpired since our wedding. Brad had spent those 6 months proving his worth as our banking partner, working overtime to demonstrate his reliability and discretion. Ashley had genuinely tried to rebuild our relationship, calling regularly and even visiting Chicago to spend time with Daniel and me without any obvious ulterior motives. My parents had been forced to compete for the insurance contract against 3 other firms, ultimately winning based on merit rather than family connections. The process had been humbling for my father, who'd never had to justify his qualifications to his own daughter before. Brittany and Mark had struggled the most with the new dynamic. Mark's real estate company had lost out on the Cedar Falls project to a firm that better understood sustainable development principles. Brittany had made several transparent attempts to position herself as our local social coordinator, all of which I'd politely declined. This is incredible, Sophia, Ashley said, admiring the restaurant's design. Daniel's vision is amazing. Thank you, I replied, noting that she'd learned to include me when praising the business rather than directing all her comments to Daniel. The sustainable farming partnerships are brilliant, Brad added. I've been telling other clients about the model. Daniel smiled politely. We're proud of what we've built here. It's taken a lot of hard work and cooperation from everyone involved. The emphasis on cooperation wasn't lost on anyone at the table. My mother raised her wine glass. I'd like to propose a toast to Sophia and Daniel and to the importance of family supporting family. I nearly choked on my drink. The audacity was breathtaking, but I'd learned to expect nothing less from her. To family, I agreed, raising my own glass, and to learning from our mistakes. The toast was awkward, but it marked a turning point. We'd never go back to the naive relationships of my childhood. But we'd found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Later, as we walked through downtown Cedar Falls, Daniel and I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. Any regrets? He asked, taking my hand. About marrying you? Never. About how we handled my family? Not one. Even though it's been so complicated? Daniel, they needed to learn that love isn't conditional on social status or financial success. The fact that it took them 6 months to figure that out says everything about who they really are. And now they know that I'm not the same person who used to beg for their approval. I'm your wife, your partner, and someone who won't tolerate being treated as less than I'm worth. We paused in front of the restaurant, looking up at the elegant Castellano sign that had transformed Cedar Falls' dining scene. Inside, our families were probably still navigating the careful conversations that had become our new normal. You know what the best part is? I said. What's that? They think this is about them finally accepting you. But really, it's about me finally accepting myself. Daniel kissed me under the streetlight, and I felt the same rush of happiness I'd experienced walking down that empty church aisle. I'd chosen love over expectation, respect over status, and authenticity over approval. In the end, my family didn't reject Daniel because he wasn't good enough for me. They rejected him because they weren't good enough for us. And that, as it turned out, was the most valuable lesson of all.